Okay, here we go. Here's another lecture. This is going to be the same setup as last time. Watch the lecture, take the notes that are attached, and then turn in the notes. Then, after the lecture, read the reading assignment that's attached and do the questions over the reading assignment and turn those in along with the notes from this lecture. Okay, so we'll get right into it. As I talked about in the last uh, lecture, that the Republicans took a big time hit on this one. They'd been in charge for a while. They kind of set up the economy the way they wanted it and thought that it was going to last. It was going to be good. And we know that that didn't happen. That wasn't a good situation. And so now the Democrats are on the rise. Talked about the 1930 midterm election, which led to uh, Republicans losing the House and almost losing the Senate. Well, with the next election that you're going to get here, you're going to get a Democratic president. So this is going to be Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is the cousin of Teddy Roosevelt, who we've talked about. And he comes from a very interesting background, a very privileged background. So he was educated at Harvard. And then after his bachelor's degree at Harvard, he went on to Columbia Law School and became a lawyer. He was a very charming individual. People that met him felt very at ease with him. He was very easy to talk to. And so that also helps when you're in politics. People trust you. In 1910, he was elected to the New York State Senate. And as in 1910, there were a lot of progressives. We've talked about the progressive movement, even his cousin, Teddy Roosevelt, who was a progressive president. So he also was a progressive and got a good reputation being a progressive. In 1913, he was appointed to the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Um, this was after, so his cousin, we keep talking about him, Teddy Roosevelt, but he had served in the same position right before the Spanish-American War. And then we know he dropped out of that in order to go and fight in the Spanish-American War in Cuba. And then here, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, his cousin, distant cousin, he gets the same job. In 1920, Roosevelt here was picked up to be the vice presidential candidate with James Cox for the Democrats, but they lost, excuse me, to President Harding. And we know how Harding's presidency went. That wasn't a good one. A year after he ran for vice president, he contracted polio. It's a virus that it is a virus that causes um, paralysis, so meaning it paralyzes people, and so it hits the nervous system, and so a lot of people that have a full blown hit of polio and have a bad reaction to it, oftentimes can lose their ability to move, walk, even breathe. And so in this situation, Roosevelt lost his ability to walk, and so he lost his legs. Um, that's not going to keep him from doing a lot of things, as we'll find out here. So he fought the disease with rigorous exercise and physical therapy. He was able to regain an ability to walk while wearing steel braces, and didn't really repair his legs, but he was able to move around. It wasn't easy for him. And most pictures you see, he is sitting down, as you'll see as we go through some of these other pictures. This one right here is a rare one of him walking around. While he was trying to recover from polio, his wife and other political friends kept his name alive in politics. And then in 1928, he ran for the governor of New York, and he won. And he served 2 terms as the governor of New York. And he helped to create the state of New York's relief agency in order to aid the unemployed. And so he got a good reputation as, being somebody who was going to use government to try to resolve things with this economic crisis. And a lot of people were willing to pay attention to that and help him get a higher position because they thought he might help him out as president. So he was extremely popular. In 1932, he was nominated by the Democrats to be their candidate for president, and he was seen as somebody who was very optimistic and somebody who was willing to go to work and was willing to try just about anything in order to try to find something that was going to help out. And this was experimental. Like I said, there had never been a financial crisis like this before. And they said, we need to do something. We just can't just sit on our hands and hope that this is going to change all by itself. We need to do something. In his acceptance speech, when he accepted the nomination from the Democrats, he gave a pretty famous quote. He said, I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people. He wanted to give the American people a new deal. And so his policies that he created, along with Congress, that tried to combat the economic crisis of the Great Depression were called the New Deal. And so that's what we're going to talk about today here, a lot about the New Deal stuff. In 1932 election, he won by a landslide. He won all but 6 states. I think by this time we had pretty much the 48 states. We didn't have Alaska as a state yet. We owned it, but it wasn't a state yet. And we had Hawaii, but Hawaii wasn't a state yet either. And so, but won all but 6 of those states. So that's a pretty big victory right there. A lot of people were impressed by his patience and his confidence, and mostly because of his overcoming polio. And that's what this quote is about here. His overcoming polio and how it made him patient and willing to work hard. And so, having lost the use of his legs and spending almost 2 years trying to regain that, it said, this is a quote, he says, if you had spent 2 years in bed trying to wiggle your big toe, after that anything else would seem easy. He's just referring to his physical therapy there and trying to regain some of the use of his legs again, and being that patient individual and still being optimistic regardless of what had happened. So before Roosevelt's inauguration, things got the darkest they had gotten at that point. Employment rose even more. There were more runs on banks, more banks failing, more jobs being lost. It was horrible. A lot of people feared that Roosevelt was going to abandon the gold standard, that they were going to go to a full fiat money system, and that they were fearful of that. And so there were a lot of people that went to the banks and converted their cash to gold. And so in order to ultimately decrease the value of gold, that's what was going to happen. And so they actually made a law when Roosevelt became president where it was illegal for you to own too much gold. And you can imagine how people freaked out about that one. Yeah, you could just imagine, because they wanted to raise the value of gold in order to be able to pay back their debts. And so, yeah, but that freaked people out to go off the gold standard. And so this would allow Roosevelt to increase the value of our currency based on how much was printed and how much was put in circulation. And then he could inflate the currency by putting more out there. He could deflate the currency by pulling some out. It's just more flexibility if you're off the gold standard, and that's what he wanted to do. Okay, he stayed on the gold standard like internationally because that's what other countries did, and that's how they worked together in that. But domestically, it wasn't backed by gold anymore. It was just what's called fiat money, just worth however much the government said it was. And so this would help to make U.S. goods cheaper by inflating the currency. And they wanted to, people wanted to withdraw their money, convert it to gold. But by inauguration, most of those banks had closed. People were running on the banks again because of this and the fear of going off the gold standard. So you've got now the highest unemployment that we ever have had in the country, and that was 25%. So 1 out of 4 workers were unemployed. When Roosevelt was inaugurated, he gave his famous quote, said, "We've reached our bottom level now. We've bottomed out. There's nowhere else to go. So now the only thing to fear is fear itself. Let's put ourselves to work and let's go and get ourselves out of this thing. And the government's going to do whatever they need to in order to change things to make things better." So, all right, we're going to finish part 1 here. We'll have a part 2.